Good afternoon to everybody. I am Mariella Guercio, President of the Scientific Committee of SOS Archivi. My task is to welcome speakers and colleagues connected today to this event dedicated to Sounds and Voices Archives as part of the events promoted to support and prepare the ICA conference, which will be held in Rome next year, more precisely on September from 19th to 20th. It will be the first ICA International Conference in presence, we hope, after almost 2 years. The ICA conference in 2022 is dedicated to the role of archives as a bridge of the gaps: democracy gap, cultural gap, distance, digital gap. The call for papers will start soon, and the topics will be better identified as a suggestion and not as a limit by the scientific committee created by ICA Program Commission. I am part with Giovanni Michetti of this committee, and on this basis we are supporting the Italian initiative called Waiting for ICA 2022, implemented by SOS Archivi and supported by ANAI, the Italian Archival Professional Association, and the Italian National Archives, which are the national partners for the conference. The initiative Waiting for ICA 2022 consists of a series of webinars and events started last month with the ambitious aim of lasting for the whole next year, with at least one, and if possible 2, monthly seminars dedicated to the most complex and challenging aspects of our profession in connection with the general conference topics. We are defining the list of proposals for the current year, soon available on the website both of SOS Archivi and ICA. Some of these proposals will be mainly dedicated to the Italian community, but some of them will have an international perspective, such as the Today initiative, which is the first one dedicated to with an international character. The next international webinar will be organized in collaboration with ICROM. It will take place on June the 7th, at the beginning of the ICA Archival Week, which celebrates the archives as a whole. This year, the theme is Empowering Archives, and our initiative in June will discuss a very challenging issue for our profession: understanding disaster risk for digital heritage. But it is time to start our webinar today, and I want to leave the space to Giovanni Michetti, who plays as a moderator, and also to the speakers. I want to thank Giovanni for planning and moderating this event. Giovanni is Assistant Professor of Archival Science at Sapienza University of Rome. He has also taught for some years at the University of British Columbia in Vancouver and the University of Urbino. His research area is focused on contemporary and digital archives. His main research interests are records management, description models, digital preservation, and new technologies applied to archives and libraries. He has been involved in national and international initiatives on digital preservation, including ARPANET and CASPER, funded both by European Union, and Inter Pares, a long and ambitious research program well known at international level. Giovanni is heavily involved in standardization as the chair of the Italian subcommittee, Archives and Records Management, in UNI, the Italian Standards Organization. He is also the Italian representative in a few ISO working groups on records management. He has authored the Italian version of 2 important standards, EAD, Encoded Archival Description, and OIS. I hope you will enjoy the webinar, and you will, all of you, animate the debate, which will conclude it. Giovanni, it's up to you.
So, thank you, Mariella, and hello, everyone. I am Giovanni Michetti, and I would like to welcome all the speakers, thank them for accepting our invitation, and introduce them to the audience. Sally Jennings is the program manager for the Save Our Sounds program at the British Library, a 5-year program aiming to transform how the British Library preserves, acquires, and engages users with sounds collections. The British Library is home to the National Sound Archive, an extraordinary collection of over 6 million recordings of speech, music, wildlife, and the environment from the 1880s to the present day. The Save Our Sound program has been created to ensure that the existing archive is preserved and new sources can be acquired and managed properly by the British Library. So Sally will tell us more about this impressive program. Enrico Giannotti has extensive working experience in the information technology and services industry. He is the managing director of CEDAT 85, an Italian company specialized in the field of professional speech recognition and development of recognition technologies. He is involved in the Save Our Sounds project. However, in his speech, Enrico will adopt a broader perspective, so he will explain how artificial intelligence can bring added value to the processing of audio-video content. Maria Francesca Stamuli started as a librarian, collaborating with the Girolamo Mini Library and the National Library of Naples, cataloging rare books. She also worked on photographs, in particular on the photographic archive of the Royal Palace of Naples. She was also involved in the Google Books search project. However, today, Maria Francesca works as an archivist in the Archival and Bibliographic Superintendency of Tuscany. In such a role, she supervises the activities of many public and private archives, focusing on oral archives and audiovisual sources. Maria Francesca will talk about Archivio Vivo, a project aimed to develop a model for preserving audio and audiovisual documentation and making it accessible and usable. Silvia Calamai is Associate Professor in Linguistics and Social Linguistics at the University of Siena. She is member of the Clarin Legal Issues Committee and the Clarin IT Group. She is coordinating two projects on oral archives, Archivio Vivo and Listen. She's also coordinating the Scientific Committee on the Historical Archive of the Arezzo Psychiatric Hospital since 2017. Silvia is in the board of the Italian Association of Speech Sciences and in the scientific board of Sonorité, the Bulletin de la FAS. Her main research interests are sociophonetics, oral archives, and dialectology. So Silvia will tell us about the Handbook on Oral Sources, a draft reference book for anyone interested in creating, managing, using, and preserving oral sources. So, without further ado, I leave the space to the speakers. So, please, Sally, the floor is yours.
Hi everyone, thank you so much for having me. I feel delighted and honoured to be here and to be talking amongst such esteemed company. I'm really looking forward to hearing the other presentations. They sound wonderful. So I hope you can see this okay. As mentioned, my name is Sally Jennings. I work at the British Library in London and I'm the programme manager for the Save Our Sounds programme. So we share some initials here, another SOS programme. And as mentioned, essentially what this programme is here to do is to transform how the British Library preserves its sound collections, acquires new sound collections, and engages people with sound collections. It's a programme that's running for a few years now, so what I wanted to talk through is what we're doing, why we're doing it, and what our next steps are, and maybe talk a bit about some of our successes and challenges on the way. So we'll start with the rationale for the Save Our Sounds programme. So as mentioned, at the British Library, we're very lucky to have a huge collection of sound recordings, probably nearer 7 million now at last count. And they cover almost anything you can imagine, from oral history to wildlife recordings to music, to speech and drama, everything you can think of that there might be a sound for. So this is a very precious and in some places a unique and rare collection, but there are risks regarding it. So the first is the fragility of the physical media. I'm sure a lot of you listening today are aware that physical media can degrade. So if we don't preserve digitally some of that content, then we risk losing it forever. We're also very aware that sometimes the means of playing that content might disappear. So mini discs, for example, was a very short-lived stage in kind of audio, the means of playing audio. Not many people have a mini disc player now. So that's another reason that we need to preserve things on those kind of formats that are no longer accessible. We are also aware of changes in the industry that is producing audio. So if we want to carry on being a relevant and an active sound archive, we need to be collecting what's being put out there in the industry now. And that is primarily a digital output. We still do collect a lot of physical sound content, so we are still getting vinyl in and CDs and other things. But we know that especially the music industry is putting out a lot of content digitally now. That will continue. And 5 years ago, when we began this program, the British Library wasn't really equipped to collect that digital content at scale. So that's something we wanted to do. We also wanted to make sure that we're engaging people with sound recordings. So this image on the bottom right-hand side is a visitor to one of our learning sessions. And I think this image really shows that sound can make a difference to people. So we want to make sure that we are making that content accessible to people, not just locking it away for ourselves. That's a lot of reasons for doing what we're doing, but I think this is a really good summary of why we're doing what we're doing and kind of feeds into the theme of this presentation around identity. So this is a tweet from one of our users who is very excited to come in 8 to 10 weeks' time because we are going to digitize a record that has her grandfather's voice on. And she will hear that voice for the first time since she was 5 years old. I think this is a really good example of how sound can be very, very important for identity, how it can touch people's lives, and how it provides as a medium a kind of very immediate, tangible effect in a way that perhaps books and other media might not. So we know that we want to do this work with sound. We knew that there were a few challenges, and thus the Save Our Sounds program was created. So it's basically there to address those risks. It's a 5-year program, and we're just past halfway through. The aims of our program is to preserve and make available as much as possible of the UK's rare and unique sound recordings, not just in our own collections at the British Library, but we are also working with 10 partners across the UK to help them do the same. We want to future-proof our archive, so we want to invest in new technology to enable us to receive music in digital formats, making sure that we can preserve that content for the long term. And we also wanted to establish a radio archive that will collect, protect, and share a substantial part of the UK's vibrant radio output, working with the radio industry and other partners. That's what we wanted to do, and this is how we are doing it. So we have a program with lots of projects within it. I won't go through them all in detail because we won't have time, but essentially we have 2 projects, the first 2 that you can see here, that are looking at preserving the content that we already have. So doing that digital preservation, that cataloging, that rights clearance, making sure that we are preserving that content for the future. And then we also have 2 projects looking at what we call future content, but really is content now and in the future, which is building the system so that we can continue acquiring audio output in the UK. Underpinning that, we have IT infrastructure and workflows. So this is all the technical work that we need to do to make sure that our aims are delivered. And we have access and engagement. So again, we are doing a lot of work via exhibitions, via learning, working with our 10 regional partners to make sure that we are getting that sound out there and sharing it with people. I'm just going to talk a little bit about what we've done to date. So this covers some of the different projects, but I've grouped them together in themes. So as mentioned, we've invested in and shared new infrastructure. We knew that in order to do what we wanted to do, we were going to have to improve some of our technical tools We've been working very hard on that. One of the things we've done is develop something that we call the universal player. At the library, we already had something called the universal viewer for images, which is an open source IIIF compliant viewer that allows us to display books. It's very user friendly. You can zoom in on books. The books can be embedded and shared and downloaded where rights allowed. And we wanted to develop an equivalent thing for sound. So sitting out alongside what we call the universal viewer, we now have the universal player, which again allows our users to play sound recordings in a very user-friendly way, but they can also, where copyright allows, embed and share them in their own websites. The final thing that I wanted to note about the universal player is that it is open source, so that code is available. We want to share what we've learned and what we've developed with other organizations who might want to use it. If there is anyone out there listening who might be interested in that, then I have put my contact details in the end. Please get in touch because we are very keen to get it out there. We've also delivered 3 kind of what we call portals. So we call them the auto ingest, Isnee and manual submission portals. And this is to help us automate the acquisition and preservation of digital recordings from the music industry. So essentially, we have one portal that allows larger record labels to submit their content to us in very big batches. It automatically goes into our digital library system. It is preserved. It is catalogued into our system. And we therefore can collect a lot more of that kind of content than we were before. We have something called a manual submission portal, which allows users to manually submit their content. And that's really aimed at smaller record labels and creators that might not be able to use the larger kind of at-scale batch processing. Finally, we have something called an Isnee Portal. So that allows creators to also register for an Isnee at the same time that they're submitting their content. And that helps them with things like tracking use of their output, royalty management, that kind of thing. It's also very useful for us as a library because it allows us to more effectively track that content across our various different catalogs and particularly track different creators. Finally, we've also invested in a huge piece of infrastructure, which is building what we call the radio archive. We were, previous to Save Our Sounds, collecting as much radio content as we could, but it was a very small amount. Building the radio archive tool has allowed us to bring in content from over 50 radio stations across the UK. And we've been utilizing speech-to-text transcription, which I'm sure our friends in CDAT will talk about later, on some of those recordings to improve discoverability and to mean we can do a bit more digital scholarship-wise with that content. And I'll talk a bit more about the radio archive in a moment. We've also collaborated with partners across the UK, so we see this as very much not just a British Library project, but one that we work with others on. This is a map of all the radio stations that we're collecting content from. And as you can see, we've very much tried to make sure that this isn't just about London, where we're based, that we are collecting content from all across the UK to create a representative picture. And we have increased capacity. So these are the 10 partners that we're working with across the UK. They are doing exactly what we're doing at different scales. So they're also working to preserve their own sound collections, make those available, catalog them, work to share them. And the benefits for us in working with this partnership is that we can do a lot of skills sharing. So what we are hoping is that by the end of this project, we will have a lot more people across the UK who are skilled and trained in caring for sound. And that will mean a much more sustainable future for sound archives in Britain, which will be a good thing. We've involved volunteers. So this is another thing where we are trying to upskill in caring for sound collections. So far, we've had 700 volunteers working on the Unlocking Our Sound Heritage project so far. They've done a variety of activities, including preparing collections, cataloguing, digitizing. And at the British Library, we've pioneered a new volunteering policy. We've really seen the benefits of this because some of these volunteers have gone on to get jobs, both at the British Library and in the audio archiving industry. So we're hoping that it's beneficial for us, but it's also giving people new skills for their careers in the cultural heritage industry. We have preserved a lot of recordings, I am pleased to say. So far we've preserved, and by which I mean digitized and ingested, Over 270,000 at-risk recordings have been preserved by our Unlocking Our Sound Heritage project. And we've also completed some big audits of the remainder of the collections to see what we should prioritize for preservation next. We've captured new audio, so I mentioned building these tools to bring in more digital content. So we're now working with 750 new record labels that we weren't working with before, who are providing their digital content to the library. And so far, we've brought on board 125,000 recordings via these new tools. The Radio Archive has captured over 180,000 programs since completion of our build from over 60 representative radio stations. And this is just a little graph of the content, the music content that we're now able to get. So we kind of went from a very low level to collecting a huge amount of recordings. And this is all pretty much automated. So it's very efficient for the library. It doesn't require a lot of human intervention. And that means that we can really increase the scale of what we're collecting. Another important thing that I really wanted to talk about, because it's very easy to talk about numbers and how much we're doing, but I want to kind of return to that why it matters. And we've really seen, particularly over the last year during the COVID pandemic, how important it has been to collect these collections in order to kind of preserve the UK's identity as it is now. So the Radio Archive has actually spent the last year collecting a huge amount of radio output that relates to the pandemic. It might be news announcements, it might be people phoning in to talk about their experiences. And that is going to be hugely important when people are researching this very significant and interesting time in future years. Equally, the new tools that we've built in the digital audio collection project to collect more music output means not only are we collecting more audio, but it's a more representative picture of what's being created and made in the UK. So we're able to get on board a lot more stuff from very small creatives as well as large record labels. Finally, Unlocking Our Sound Heritage work with partners across the country and its clear focus on engagement as well as preservation and cataloguing and all of that other good stuff has meant that we're preserving a much more diverse range of recordings, and we're also reaching new audiences by this collaborative approach. I think we found this really, really significant, and it's been a big lesson for us that as well as doing that preservation, we need to kind of take those next steps to show these recordings to people, to let them hear them. To that end, we have used recordings to reach new audiences. So we've had the first sound-based artist in residence at the British Library, and that is Awate, who you can see pictured here, doing a live event for us. So he used the recordings in our collections to create a new composition, which he debuted at this event. We've run multi-sensory events for people living with the dementia illness at the London Metropolitan Archives, which have been very successful. We've hosted listening walks for people with visual impairments at our partners in Norwich. And we've done what we called a baby takeover day at the Great North Museum in Newcastle, which is inviting parents with young children in to engage with the sound collections that way. So as I mentioned, we're about maybe 2/3 of the way through the project. So we've done a lot, we're very proud of it, but we have more to do. Our next steps over this year are to continue the 2-year pilot of our Radio Archive and continue acquiring new content via both the Radio Archive and our new music tools. We want to develop new long-term preservation models for sound recordings, using what we've learned in the program so far to make sure that we're doing this efficiently and ongoing. And we're going to continue with a lot of our preservation, cataloguing, rights clearance, learning and engagement activity. Next year, we plan to launch a new sounds website, at which point you will be able to see the universal player that I mentioned. It will be there for the public to use. We'll be doing some more skills sharing, a bit more promotion, and at that point, our Unlocking Our Sound Heritage project ends, but we will be doing a bit more preservation activity. In 2023, we will be sadly wrapping up the Save Our Sounds programme as a whole, but we are very keen that we are going to integrate our lessons and our work into business as usual, because as mentioned earlier, what this programme is really there to do is create this kind of sustainable, ongoing future for sound archiving. So we're hoping that what we're learning in the programme will be a lesson that we can take forward for the British Library in general. that's the end of my presentation. I've put my contact details here and the Twitter handle for the work we're doing, BL Sound Heritage, so you can find out about updates on the projects there. I'm afraid that I have to leave a bit early, unexpected at the end, so I might not be here for all of the Q&A, but I'm very happy to follow up with any questions if anyone wants to follow up by email or pass them on to the organisers of the event, and I'm sure they'll pass them on to me. Again, thank you so much for having me, and I hope you've enjoyed the talk.
Sorry. And thank you, Sally, for such an interesting presentation. In a very short time, you highlighted some fundamental issues when preserving and using these materials. I have just a very quick question for you, because it is about the National Radio Archive that will collect, protect, and share some of the UK's radio outputs. Are you going to take everything, or is there a policy in place for selecting? You know, that selection, I mean, appraisal, I would say.
It's an incredibly,
yeah.
It's a really good question. We would absolutely love to take everything, but we don't have the capacity to do it. So there is a selection policy. Two things I would say is, one, we kind of have a selection policy, and that is partly based around being representative. So it's about, you know, we collect from the BBC, a very large, you know, lots of output, but also smaller community radio stations in Welsh. You know, we're trying to get a real mix of the diversity of radio output across the UK. We want to make sure we're not region specific. And then partly we do have to look at, you know, what's happening in the world and what we might want to reflect. So obviously the kind of COVID related collecting has formed part of that. The other thing is that we're very, very lucky in the project to have a radio archive curator whose job it is to look at this. And I'm very thankful that we made that decision, because actually it has been quite full time. So he's able to spend a lot of time kind of actually curating this content rather than it just coming in. So that's where we're at. I think that will be an evolving policy. We're learning more about it as we do it. But yeah, that's how we're managing it so far.
Great. So may I say that diversity is one of the key factors for selection, for the selection policy?
Okay. Yeah, I'd say that's pretty much true.
Okay. So again, thank you very much. And now we'll leave the floor to Enrico Giannotti. And please, Enrico, tell us more about artificial intelligence and its application in this area.
Thank you, Giovanni. First of all, thanks a lot for being here. I'm quite honored and glad to be participating in such a great and valuable event, and bring our experience in terms of a corporation that since 1985 has been working with speech. So speech is our bread, I would say. And this is also the reason why we feel that for us, word is the real value, and words matter. This is also our tagline. And today, I'm glad to share with you our experience, because when we started, of course, in 1985, our experience was related to deal with speech with the methodologies, I would say, more than technologies that at that time were available. And what happened when we, even due to the big investments we made in research and development, all the developments that we achieved by introducing speech recognition, which is a part of the artificial intelligence. And today I want to bring here with you our experience on how artificial Sorry about that. So our artificial intelligence can help in also manage in a proper way archives. So this is something that comes from an activity where we have more than 35 years experience. lots of solutions that were developed to manage different types of audio that come from the batch and the real time. So what we experience in the archives is, of course, what we used to work with the batch recordings that are related to audio recordings, maybe even from the 40s, the 50s years. And the capability of the technology and artificial intelligence is to work with a speaker-independent approach. That is to say that the technology that we are using and we also to apply to archives is a technology that makes it available not to train any speaker, but to adapt itself to every single voice and to transcribe it. And then we will see later what we mean for transcribing, which is not just having a text, but is mainly have something more, a valuable output. Another big challenge that speech recognition and AI has to consider to face is the different type of speakers that can be different because of the gender, because of the original area, because very likely, for instance, for English, where we have a big experience, now English is spoken so well, like Jenny before, is not so often, but we are more. There are more situations where you have to talk to take care of English spoken by a non-native like myself. So my English is far to be perfect, and as well the German speaking English and other. And this is a challenge for artificial intelligence and needs to be addressed in a specific way. Also, audio recordings cover different aspects of recordings that can come from radios, like before Sally said, for the BBC, the British Library project, or maybe comes from mobile, from other microphones, from conferences. And all of these are main differences with the noise around. And so these are the challenges that an artificial intelligence has to take care to provide a value on what we can do. All this experience led us to be also considered by Gartner one of the main players in the speech-to-text arena worldwide, specifically for some of the solution that we are using for this type of needs. About application of artificial intelligence to digitalization and archiving. So things are changing a lot. As also was said before, even in the last 12 months, there was a big change on how we work, big change that is going to affect also in the future how we are going to take care of the data we have to archive, due to remote access and to other different ways to work. And even the digital transformation process is really accelerating. And this acceleration is bringing on the table another issue, because there is a benefit from digitalization, but on the other side, digitalization is going to produce a huge amount of data. This kind of phenomenon is called datafication. So there is a problem in terms of creating and having so many digital data that then needs to be used. And this is where artificial intelligence can have an impact and can be effective. There is another important target that we have by using artificial intelligence taking care of audio and video. That is something that gives the possibility to be productive, more productive when approaching a project, and also to have as another benefit to give the possibility to have these data, these archives, to be more accessible for a full inclusion, even for people which have some issues with hearing impaired or different other issues. In the last years, artificial intelligence and speech recognition had really a big, huge development progression due to different ways and algorithms and ways that we were able as a community, not just only as a CEDAT85, because we are also benefiting from what in this community are the improvements, specifically on what is called the neural networks approach, which is something similar to what happens into our brain, and also our all our way to think is related. And this type of science that is going deeper into the details is allowing to apply this technology with better results. So by applying speech to text, we see we have concrete opportunities to get from text to transform the text in a valuable text. So to create value on the text, because we can have the possibility to get the information whenever and where it is needed. So in a more easy and accessible way, which we will show later. We have also the possibility to benefit more from a more accurate and more detailed process of digitalizing this kind of information. We have the possibility also to apply other technologies like machine translation. Therefore, a content which is in a specific language can be also accessible in another language. This is a kind of another project that we are doing for the European Parliament, where we are taking care of the transcription and translation in 24 languages of the plenaries and the meetings of the European Parliament in real time. But also the idea is, and the target is to have to create an archive where these speeches from our members of the Parliament can be reached more easily. And as I mentioned before, the purpose is also to improve accessibility for inclusion, participation for everybody. And as, of course, before Sally said very clearly, one of the main topics is also to preserve our heritage, our history, and to be able to provide easier access to it. So basically, by applying artificial intelligence on archives, we see that many purposes can be achieved, like efficiency, productivity, even time saving, and also the possibility to take care of what are very delicate archives in a better way, and an easy way that is easy to access for everybody. Just to give you an idea of what we are talking about, this is just an example of what we are used to do when we have to reach, to deal with an archive. As you can see here, this is just a screen of a web page, which allows via web to have access to an archive. In this case, this is an audio and video archive, where we can manage live videos when they are broadcasted. And when at the end, they are not just stored on an archive, but they become suddenly and immediately reachable. In which way? Because there is an advanced search tool, which is not a simple advanced search tool, but is a search that works on every single that was spoken and is spoken into the video. And this gives the possibility to search in a semantic way, either by word, by phrase, to retrieve any type of information that was told, that was pronounced into the recording. Therefore, you don't need to have anybody to tag to add information manually regarding that specific video. The outcome is something like this, where you can have an abstract with the most important things related to the name of the audio recording. What are here is the kind of abstract or was said. We made a search with the new jazz. And as I mentioned before, this type of semantic search can work not only just by word, which is an easy task, but also by phrase, by going on the meaning of the of the search. The other aspects which is related to what I said before is more related to the accessibility is the possibility then to enrich the audio and the video with the text. The text that is here and is behind the video, and it pops up like a karaoke, let's say. Therefore, you can, a hearing impaired person can even read very easily what is told. It is a kind of subtitle that is showed as a full text as the transcription. So just for summarizing, we believe and we have a concrete experience to apply artificial intelligence on archiving, to remove barriers, to provide a different way to approach this type of archive, because recording itself is something that you need to work properly to be accessible. Accessibility is not just the possibility to search, but also the possibility to give access to these recordings and data, even to people which don't have an alternative way to do it, like hearing impaired. And of course, the security is something which is also always related, in our view, to artificial intelligence, specifically in pandemic conditions where you can have also transcription, translation, and when you have to access remotely and you need, you don't have a support and you need maybe other technologies that could support better the access to this information. Thank you very much. Here below our details, and more than glad to answer to any question later. Thank you.
And thank you, Enrico, for bringing up so many intriguing concepts and ideas. I'm sure that Maria Francesca will add some more food for thought. So please, Maria Francesca, would you take the stage?
Hi, yes. Hi, everybody. I am here in order to present Archivio Vivo. Can you see my PowerPoint presentation? I hope so. Okay, thank you. I'm very honored to be here presenting Archivio Vivo, and I want to thank also Silvia Calamai that will follow me after, because she's one of the coordinator of this project, a project that is financed, oh my God, sorry. Okay. Is a project financed by the Public Administration of Tuscany, and it aims to create a model for managing and giving public access to audio and audiovisual archives and oral sources. More specifically, in order to create this model, we are now exploring methods for recovering, restoring, and preserving audio and audiovisual documents, mainly related to oral sources. And we are engaging now in developing web-based services for both the description of those documents and their secure access. Archivio Vivo inherited know-how and data of Grafo project. Grafo, or Grammofoni della Voce, was a project promoted by the University of Siena and the Scuola Normale of Pisa from 2007 to 2013. The project saved digitizing audio documents for more than 3,000 hours of sound recordings. Recordings that which were had been collected over the years by researchers and amateur field workers in Tuscany, and which were at high risk of being lost. Among those recordings, there are also Caterina Bueno's recordings, and that constitutes Archivio Vivo pilot study. These recordings are a challenging starting point for reasons related on one hand to Caterina Bueno's profile as researcher and performer, and on the other hand to the, let's say, the history of her archive. Caterina Bueno was an Italian research and performer. Her work was oriented towards research in which the folk culture was considered a high value of community resilience in industrial and post-industrial societies. This means that what she recorded was deeply related with her performances, and so with the recordings of her performances. She, at the age of 20, she started traveling through the Tuscan countryside, recording elements of the deeply endangered oral culture of peasants, artisans, of common men and women, and were the same materials that she proposed in her performances. Caterina Bueno's archive so has a complex history over than a complex content, we would say. She in fact tried to guarantee the preservation of her recordings, copying and depositing them through many different institutions, such as the Fondazione Laboratori Officine Galileo, that is an interesting cooperative institutions, and the Institute, the Martino Institute. So now we have on one side what constituted her archive, and that is was partially lost at the moment of her death, and on the other hand, all the copies of her recordings distributed in many different archives. Still, this year has been possible to uncover reels and cassettes that were unknown, and that maybe are unique original analog tapes. So Caterina Bueno's sound recordings will constitute the pilot study on which Archivio Vivo will decline a model, and a model that we will offer 5, let's say, lines of action, and that I would like to briefly sketch out this afternoon for you. This model so will offer a shared metadata set consistent with FAIR principles and conformed to international standards, and a system for the management and the access to now Tuscan oral sources and related documents. Answers to legal issues related to creating and archiving oral sources, innovative research on audio and audiovisual archives, and productions based on oral sources and audio and audiovisual documents and archives. First, so about the first point, Archivio Vivo will adopt a metadata set according to what is prescribed in the introduction of the standard, ISED standard, where it is stated that in order to enable appropriate description of special materials such as sound recordings, archival standards should be used in conjunction with manuals setting out descriptive rules for such materials. This is the reason for which we need to cross with bibliographic cataloging standards.
In the case of sound recordings, in fact, these manuals are based on bibliographics describing standards, such as, for the IASA rules, for example, the International Standard Bibliographic Description for non-book materials. Archivio Vivo will propose a model of description in which the bibliographic model is embedded in the archival, multi-level, and contextual description. Mainly, this embedding will attest at the level of the item or audio or audiovisual document. These metadata will, as we say, comply with the FAIR principles. This means that metadata and data will be findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. FAIR principles are the base of the approach to the data and database of Clarin, Common Language Resource and Technology Infrastructure, a research infrastructure of pan-European interest, where Archivio Vivo will put the infrastructure, the catalog, let's say, within the repository of the Italian node of Clarin ID will use the NuGuard Cloud network and will be improved through an experimental approach to the conservation, management, and access to audio, and mainly audio, at least in this pilot study stage, and audio-video data and metadata. Clarin ID will host the Archivio Vivo, let's say, Archivio Vivo ecosystem. This ecosystem, this system will consist, this digital asset management, will consist of two different parts: an entry interface for an access interface. Both of them, of course, will be web-based. The first one, the entry interface, will provide a data and metadata entry interface for archivists, archive owners, researchers, or in general curators of audio and audiovisual documents and of oral sources. This interface will offer a web-based and guided working flow that will ensure the creation of preserving copies, their restoration, and the description of audio documents and of the archives that they are part of. The second part of the infrastructure will consist of an access interface that can support researchers of different disciplines in discovering and studying oral sources and audio and audiovisual documents, of course. The project will also exploit the federated identity service of the Clarin infrastructure in order to manage users' access and, as we will see, legal issues. The data management asset selected among 10 is the open source platform XDAMS. Archivio Vivo will enhance XDAMS, extending this data structure and integrating new functions in order to ensure a complete workflow through which preserve, digitize, restore, identify, and describe audio documents, and at the same time, to guarantee to the users free and authenticated access based on the different type of content, documents, and aims of the research. This can be possible facing the complexity of the audio and audiovisual documents. That means mainly recognizing the complex bond between carrier and content. The complex bond among analog recordings, digitized copy, and audio documents. In fact, in order to preserve and ensure access through the time to analog audio recordings, the compact cassettes or the open reel tapes and their contents, it is essential to submit them to a complex digitization process in order to create a preservation copy. The new digital master that we can define, the new digital master of the carrier. The preservation copy, in fact, is composed of the audio content as well as all other exhaustive information about the carrier, such as the photo of the carrier itself, or of its box, or of the little paper that is inside that box, and information about its conservative conditions at the moment of the digitization. Where necessary, digitized audio recording will be restored in order to make it available, listenable, through clipping the sound wave file where the sound is not accessible. For example, because the tape was recorded, the original tape was recorded maybe at different speeds. So the sound can be very, very fast. And in order to make it listenable, we need to restore it. This moment, the clips will be the restored portions of the preservation copy, now accessible in order to be listened and analyzed by the curator. This analyzing moment is the moment in which we identify, or the curator identify, the different items or audio documents. It has a portion of sound pertaining to the very same communicative event, and that can be stored communicative event. A document, in fact, a sound document pertaining the same event can be maybe stored on different carriers, or many different documents can be stored in the same carrier. So it's very important to understand, to identify the document in order to describe it correctly and to properly give them the contextual information. The choice about restoration and identification are always formalized and preserved in the metadata holding the history of the document. So this is our methodology, and this is a mock-up of the interface for the curator, let's say. The interface access of Archivio Vivo will indeed provide the curators with a web tool for listening to and describing the audio content of the clips extracted from the preservation copy. The interface is in fact composed of two main elements: the audio player and the section for the segmentation of the audio content. The access interface aims, this is the access interface, aims to provide the user with an access tool that takes into account the available contextual information of the item and archival unit. This interface can be divided in two different areas: an upper area that displays the item description and the archival contextual information, a middle area that contains the audio player with a pre-generated waveform in order to be it can be easy to download and to listenable. On the left side, you can see the clip metadata, and the user can interact with this list by clicking on the different segments which are bound to the temporal instant of the audio clip. If we have some question about this, maybe I would like to invite you to make the access to the items and archives will always pay attention to the ethical and legal issues regarding oral sources and audio and audiovisual documents. In this first step, the group of Archivio Vivo worked mainly about balancing the freedom of information rights, the research concerns with the privacy rights on one side and copyright issues on the other. This balancing has been exploited on the pilot case archive of Archivio Vivo, as I said, the collection of sound recordings of Caterina Bueno. And the main result is the definition of several classes of authentication through the Federated Identity Service of Clarin Infrastructure, a robust system for managing authentication. These classes of user will grant different kind of contents, sensitive, copyrighted, to different type of users, researchers, not researchers. Fourth line, the innovative research, let's say, the entire ecosystem, the methods, the solution proposed by Archivio Vivo are at the same time scientifically communicated and experimentally shared with the territory. It means that we propose this approach to our archivists in order to have an accessible audio and audiovisual archive. Here you have some references and the productions. Archivio Vivo promotes productions through live meetings and concerts on social channels, and we hope soon live with materials and documents that are now in the archive and that soon will be offered to the communities. Thank you for your attention and patience.
Okay. Thank you, Francesca, for presenting the Archivio Vivo project in detail. And now, last but not least, Silvia is going to close the round of presentations. So, Silvia, the floor is yours.
Many thanks for your kind invitations. I hope that my screen can be seen also by others. Please confirm me. Can you see my screen and my PowerPoint? Just to be sure that I can start. Okay, so thank you. I'm here and also on behalf of Alessandro Casellato and Maria Francesca Stamoli to present a challenging experience, a challenging research and human experience that I had in the past years, and to discuss with you what the preparation, the writing of the vademecum per il trattamento delle fonti orali has represented to several communities of research and passionates working on oral archives. So I think that right now the audience has already had an idea of what oral archives are and how complex they are, because they are not made only of audio and video documents, but also written documents. So we are dealing now with something very complex, very unusual, also for universities and institutions. And we started thinking about the complexity of these documents altogether from different fields of knowledge, starting with several, let's say, key questions. First of all, oral sources are fragile objects. They're not so present in the mind of researchers. When we think about archives, we think about paper archives, not about sound archives. We have to face with several projects, several initiatives, several repositories, and maybe each repositories that every institution has does not speak to other repositories. There is not a common vocabulary, a shared jargons among different fields of knowledge. And in addition, we observed that there was an absence of shared guidelines for people starting working with oral archives. And finally, we must also consider the fact that there are very different types of users, researchers in the academia, but also patients and also independent researchers working outside academia and working with oral archives. So since oral archives are at the crossroads of several disciplines, linguistics, oral history, dialectology, ethnomusicology, and so on, we had to find some answers to our questions. How and where should oral documents be preserved? What are the best standards for long-term preservation, curation, and cataloging? And how can oral archives be accessible and reusable in the light of copyright, ownership, privacy issues? So we start working together. We first met at a congress in Arezzo at my department some years ago, and we had a round table on oral archives with very, very different subjects from academia, from institution such as libraries, such as institution of Italian state, such as also company. For instance, there was also Monica Palmerini from CEDAT 85 speaking about their experience on oral archive, just like this afternoon. We then had a meeting, first real meeting, working on the writing of this vademecum, of these guidelines, with trying to answer to the previous research question that we had in mind. Then we had another congress in Turin, at the end of in October 2019. Then COVID arrived, so we start meeting in online mode, but we still had a very, very complex meeting discussing all the issues that we had to solve. And just to give an idea how many people work in this initiative, you can see all the institutions that I mentioned, from university, from institution, foundations, from Soprintendenza, from CNRs in Italy, and association, scientific association like ISO, Italian Association of Oral History, ISV, Italian Association of Speech Sciences, and so on. And what is important to underline in this slide is the fact that here you have postdoc students at the very beginning of their scientific careers, and also retired scholars were at the end of their career, so to say. And this underlined the fact that this vademecum was also a passage of knowledge between generations, young scholars working face-to-face with not so young scholars and so on, trying to working together with the same aim. So we started the writing process, then we had a public moment in which we presented on a web, like today, via the web, like today, we present our work and we discuss the meaning of our work, and we open a sort of public revision process in which people were invited to send us observations and reviewing all the work. How the vademecum is structured, it is in Italian at the moment, but we plan to translate it into English also. It is divided into 3 parts. The first one deals with production and description of oral sources. The second one about preservation of oral sources, and the third one about reuse and dissemination of oral sources. And most importantly for the users, for the final users, are the annexes. There is a list of preservation centers, a list of conservation centers, a list of places where scholars and people working with oral archives can deposit their treasures. There are a lot of models of informed consent according to the GDPR, and model for the description of the oral archives that people are collected or are willing to collect. So there are a lot of useful things that we prepared for next generation scholars working on oral archives. And during the public review that lasted for 3 months, we received 25 answers to an online questionnaires and more details reviews via email. Who answered to our requests? Scholars, first of all, PhD students, but also people working in archives and libraries, and people that can be labeled as documentalists. One important thing is that people were satisfied with our work. We suppose, since they answered that on a scale from 1 to 4, they answered that they were satisfied at 3 levels. So we are rather happy about this result. And the most important thing is that people told us that it was necessary this was a work that was necessary for having people more aware of what they were doing with oral sources. So what we are doing now, we are doing a sort of tutorials and dissemination activities among graduate students, among PhD students at university, but also at South University, in order to disseminate this work and tell people, well, now you have a sort of guidelines, so you can look at it and then start your field work with more knowledge and with more competence. We are doing also dissemination activities via Clarin, that is to say via the European infrastructures, also on a more international level. And we hope to produce a final version of the vademecum by the end of this summer, in order to have a public final presentation during the World Day for Audiovisual Heritage. And we are now working also on an English version in order to spread his work, which was a sort of service work done for people starting with their path towards archives, oral archives. So thank you for your attention, and I hope that this vademecum will be useful also for you and for your work. Many thanks.
Thank you, Silvia, for such an interesting presentation. And I don't know if Sally is with us. Sally, are you with us? Oh, perfect.
Yes, I am.
Perfect. Great. Because we received a comment from the public, and Anna wrote a very interesting presentation, and I would like to know more about the universal player. Do we need to adopt the same audio format, or is there a way to adapt common and used audio formats so that they can be adapted in order to fit the universal player? I guess she wants to know how it works, more or less, because you stated the analogy with the AAAF, which is very interesting, but I guess images are a bit different, maybe. So maybe you can tell us more.
Yes, that's a very, very good question. And I'm going to be absolutely honest and say I'm not going to give you an absolute answer now, because I am not the technical expert on the player, and I don't want to give you the wrong information just in case. I suspect that in answer to your question, it's probably yes, you can adapt things, but what I can do is take that one away and follow up with you if that's helpful. So if someone could pass on an email address or contact details, I'd be happy to. I just want to check with our solutions architect, who is part of the AAAF community and does this kind of stuff, before I give you an absolute answer on that one, if that makes sense.
Okay, so perfect. And I have a very quick question also, just for you again, about how did you develop this relation with the other public entities? How did it work? Because, you know, sometimes even in public administration, we have problems in collaborating and interacting with different entities. So even making surveys may be very, very difficult. So it's interesting that you are trying to collect a lot of materials from different sources, public and private sources, public entities. So I wonder if this is difficult, how strong is the collaboration and the level of engagement from these entities?
So I would say that it's very strong, and that is one of the things we feel very proud about in the program, but that took some effort, because I think historically, maybe not so much now, but historically, we didn't do so much collaboration at the library. I actually think that's changing quite a lot now. And then also there's so many different organizations, but the way that we started really was doing a lot of call outs and surveying and working out who across the UK had audio collections. So we were very aware of the kind of distribution of where there were kind of rare and unique collections that we thought needed digital preservation, which was the kind of starting point of the whole program, even though we're doing a lot more there. We are very lucky in that our program is also funded by, or that project is funded by one of the UK's biggest funders, the Heritage Lottery Fund. So in some ways, that's quite an attractive proposition for organizations, because they're going to get funding for doing this work. So I can't say that that wasn't like a nice way in to attract people. But having said that, I think the way we've managed it since, and it has been very successful, is genuinely working in collaboration. And sometimes that means that we at the BL have to understand that our way isn't the only way of doing things, and there are other ideas, and genuinely being open to new ideas and different experiences and different bits of expertise. Throwing a lot of kind of administration time at it. I don't think you can underestimate how much kind of, you know, liaison and talking to people and administration is required. And that has been helpful to us, to have that time and a person to kind of dedicate to that. And then I think really just it sounds obvious, but making it a priority. So we really had to say that the collaboration is part of this. So we're really going to put effort into it, and that's been helpful for us. But we've we've learned a huge amount. We've kind of come out of this thinking that we need to continue this network. We need to learn things, particularly during the pandemic when, we were all closed and we had to do a lot of digital communication and work. The pandemic was obviously awful in general, but it did kind of strengthen that partnership working, because we did almost have to rely on each other a bit more. So that was a lesson we learned.
Perfect. Thank you very much again. I guess Mariella maybe has a question.
Yes, I have a question to speakers who wants to answer. I am not a specialist in the sector, even if I followed. I think that the oral and audio and video sources are very important for the contemporary heritage. And I realized that 2 years ago I followed that master thesis. And I realized that after 20 years, even more, 25 years, when these sources were recognized as important sources for the archival and librarian heritage, we do not have common guidelines, common standards. It is because it is a too complex environment, because it is too fragmented. Which are the main reasons for this lack of guidelines? I think that the guidelines, common guidelines, could be a very important basis to save the heritage. Who wants to answer?
Oh, if I may, I have an answer from the point of view of sociolinguists that is rather different from your point of view. I think that in my field, transcriptions were unfortunately much more important than recordings. So dialectologists and also linguists, they start transcribing what they were collecting in the field, and then dismissing what they originally had with the microphone, with the cassette recorders, with the open reel. So I think that it's also our fault if there is a lack of guidelines, at least according to, if you see the history of our discipline. Also, oral historians, at the very beginning, they paid more attention to transcriptions, and they discarded the support that now is so important for us, because transcription is already a second level of analysis with respect to the event that people were recording. So this is I know that my point of view is a little bit partial, but I think that at university, this was really happened in this way. And only now we are paying attention to legacy data, to reuse of legacy data for next generation of sociolinguistics, of oral historians, and so on. But this is a long way of realizing what was done in the past and what we are doing now. Now, that's my answer.
Is there anyone who wants to say something about this topic?
Yes, it's a very complex question, I would say, because I was thinking also about the cross-disciplinary problem, let's say, that disciplines like linguistics and oral history and other disciplines that collect field works, anthropology, ethnomusicology, they use oral sources, but we have also done, they collect it in a different way with different methods, and not always they agree about these methods. This is the first. The second is that oral sources don't overlap perfectly with what we call document or item. and in the archival meaning. I mean, oral sources are not only the sound, the audio document, but are a complex of a lot of documents in order to represent and to restitute the oral sources. Our field notes, our photographs, are maybe a different recordings of the same moment or a different photo of the same moment. So it's very interesting on an archival point of view, because you have to kind of understand that there are many documents related to the same activity and or the same moment that you're documenting, and plus the problem of description. I mean, I see that in the British tradition, the oral sources and audio and audiovisual documents are kind of a bibliographic, are very related to the bibliographic description and not to the archival description. And this is interesting because you put on the same level different type of audio documents, oral sources, and maybe a defined product that is a radio product or a recording of a concert or a production. You, for example, non-book materials are advised, even in the ISED, as are advised. I mean, the YASA rules are advised to be followed to describe recordings, sound recordings, but with the International Standard Bibliographic description for non-book materials, you describe a CD that is something completely different from let's say, a document of an activity of a researcher. So we have the same things, but on different perception. And yes, it is very, very complex. And another point is the difficulty to recognize the difference, the bond between the carrier and the document. One real cassette can have inside many documents, many audio items related to different, a song that that Caterina Buenos, let's say, recorded in Prato, and then on the other side, a rehearsal. You can't treat an archivist speaking in an archivistic way as the same document. I think, I don't know, I mean, I think that you can't. And because they were not institutional sources. So I think Italian tradition were less open to treat these documents like documents. And we're still trying to find a balance also to ensure the preservation of these sources and documents. Sorry, I've been...
Thank you, Maria Francesca. Thank you for your answer. And I would like to hear also from Enrico about this point. And also, maybe he can tell us, maybe very quickly, I took some notes when he was speaking, and I noticed that he used the word accessibility, security, efficiency, productivity, etc. You didn't mention authenticity. So my very quick question is how artificial intelligence can help us understanding, using, improving authenticity when dealing with these sources. But first, I know that you would like to say something about the previous answer. Please, Enrico. We cannot hear you, Enrico. Is it me? We cannot hear you. It's not. Oh, that's a pity.
You have to answer by writing by email. We'll wait for your answers.
Okay. So anyway, we are really on time. It's 6:30. I'm sorry, Enrico. We would have liked to hear from your voice, but we know that there will be some other opportunities to engage in a discussion about these topics because they are very interesting. So again, thank you all for your very interesting presentation, and I hope there will be again other opportunities to engage with these topics. Thank you, Sally. Thank you, Silvia. Thank you, Maria Francesca. And thank you, Enrico. Thank you also to Mariella. And thank you to SOS Archivi for giving us the opportunity to discuss these interesting topics.
See you, all of you, in Rome next year in September. We wait for you.
Yeah, I forgot. This is we have to remember that this is waiting for ICA. So this is just a path to that event, which will be in September from 19th to 23rd of September. So anyway, there will be, we are going to
time to remember.
Okay. Thank you again, and goodbye, and see you all. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.